This is TJ Legacy, host of the Soapboxx Podcast. The live stream will start shortly, but make sure you like our Facebook page, follow us on Instagram, and tell all of your friends and family that the most infamous podcast on all your streaming services is about to go live.
TJ, what's goody? It's HB. Can I just big you up real quick with what you're doing with the Soapboxx? Listen, anytime somebody takes their platform to educate and inform the culture of hip-hop with politics, pop culture, doing what you're doing and being responsible with your platform, I can't do nothing but salute you, TJ. Keep doing what it do. Keep repping for the culture. Nothing but love and respect for me, baby. Peace.
Tell me what's really good. It's Peter Rosenberg, Hot 97, ESPN, WWE, Cheap Podcast, all that. Big shout out to my peoples over at the Soapboxx, all right? My man TJ, Legacy Cole, the whole Soapboxx crew. Incredible new podcast, all right? Politics, pop culture, hip-hop, even wrestling on occasion. It's all there. So go subscribe and make sure you tune in to the Soapboxx. TJ, what up, man? Appreciate you.
Peace to the planet. Charlemagne the God here. What's happening, TJ Legacy Cole? Salute to you, King. Salute to the Soapboxx Podcast. The Soapboxx Podcast is an independent black media podcast, and they talk hip-hop, politics, pop culture, mental health, social justice, a lot of my favorite subjects. Check them out, man. Tune in, subscribe to them. You never know. I'm out here looking at all the different podcasts that are moving and shaking out here, because I got the Black Effect Podcast Network, so I'm gonna be checking y'all out, TJ. All right, keep working.
Hey, appreciate you, Charlemagne. Hey, welcome to the Soapboxx Podcast. I'm your host, TJ Legacy, and of course, I'm joined with my man all the way from NYC, New Jersey, up north. What's going on, Alan York? How you been?
Man, I feel good, man. I'm doing good. It's summertime out here, so it's getting a little bit too sticky, man. How you feeling though?
Yo, I'm feeling. I mean, you said you didn't get a haircut off camera, but I'm seeing the sneaky waves. I'm seeing the tsunami. So you ready for the summertime flow? I see you.
Well, listen, I didn't say I didn't get a haircut. I was just saying that this is more of an accumulation of prayer and persistence. Prayer, persistence, and the blue can, my brother.
Yes.
All about the blue can.
Yes. So for those who are traditionally listening or watch the Soapboxx Podcast, we have our co-hosts Jesse and Giovanni. Ladies are out. They're on motherly duty. So you know how we roll. Whenever we need someone to step in and step up, of course, we have to reach out to Miss Morgan. What's going on, Morgan? How you doing?
Hey, y'all. I always enjoy being on here with y'all. So thank you.
Absolutely glad to have you. Yo, Alan, I don't know if you've seen Morgan on her social media, but Morgan's out here at brunches. She's getting ready. She, like you, is getting ready for the summertime flow, like living her best life. So the glow. What's going on in your world, Morgan?
So much. I actually just got through filming for the very first time. So that was exciting. So I've been doing a little bit of that. And not really being out like that, but out like that.
Can you tell us what you're filming or what you filmed?
Yes, it's a faith-based film called The Book False Prophet. Very good storyline about a pastor in and out of things that he should not be in.
Oh Lord!
And I do.
Studio near you.
I do play his girlfriend, so it's very interesting.
Okay, all right. We'll catch it on the flip side. But listen, of course, we have to make sure that we introduce our guests today. We're having a really serious conversation about what's going on in foreign affairs with Palestine and Israel, and we made a commitment to our Soapboxx Nation that listen, we're going to get some folks in here that can do this topic justice and be experts in it. So first, I want to introduce friend of the show. You guys know him from Miami, Florida. My brother, State Senator Dwight Bullard. What's going on, man? How you doing?
What's good, Soapboxx family? Good to be in the building. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that you're playing the pastor's girlfriend, but not his wife. Is that? I saw that angle, and I was like, wait a minute, I got questions.
Yeah, he says I'm the love of his life. So hey, you know how that goes. You know how that go.
It's about to be a whole problem when that film drops. Okay, I see what it is. There's about to be a lot of toes stepped on. But I digress. Happy to be on the show. Happy to be talking about this particular subject matter because I think people need to know, various perspectives, but especially, the real on kind of what's going on and things that have not been told, truths that have not been told. So I'm happy to be here to drop a little bit of knowledge on this.
Absolutely. We appreciate you being here. And listen, this next guest has been in the works for about a year. I've been massaging and making sure this person is comfortable to come on to the soapbox. I've been politicking but this is a heavyweight in this space when it comes to activism. This is she's the CEO, president, and founder of Unbought Power, Palestinian American activist. I know her. She supported me in all of my activism in Orlando, Florida, when we did the Blackout Hate Rally. So I definitely appreciate her for that. But Rashi Mubarak, welcome to the Soapboxx Podcast for the first time. Give her a round of applause. Hey,
y'all.
How you doing, Rashi?
I made it. I'm gonna tell my mama I made it.
Yes. This is it. Usually people just kind of retire after this, but we still need you to do work with the soapbox. After the soapbox, but we do appreciate you. Whenever I spoke with Dwight Bullard off camera and was like, hey, I want to have this conversation. You were one of the first people that I had in mind. Was like, look, I got to get you on so that because this is your passion, this is your life. It literally is your life. So I wanted to do justice. But first, we are going to find out what's popping. Morgan, tell us what's going on in the news. What's popping with Juneteenth?
Man, so listen, we finally, I guess for some people would say, finally got a breakthrough. So for those of you who are not familiar with what Juneteenth is, it is the oldest nationally celebrated commemoration of the ending of slavery in the United States. In June 19th, 1865, soldiers landed in Galveston, Texas with the news that the Civil War had ended and that the enslaved were now free. And this was 2.5 years after the fact. So,
yes,
you know how we feel about that. Just like this bill is, has, needing to have been done already. But Biden did sign the Juneteenth bill, creating a new federal holiday commemorating the end of slavery in the U.S. So, I guess for some people that's a paid holiday. For others, like the women that you see in the photo, it's a big deal, something that, they have been, wanting for a very long time. So it is, great to have that in place. However,
got you.
We appreciate it, but we would like something a little bit more.
Got you.
How do you feel about the sign, and how do you guys feel about it, becoming a holiday? Do you think this is just something to pass up, just something to, get us out the way for a little bit? Well, that's how I'm feeling.
Look, let's pass the ball to our guest, Senator Dwight Bullard. What's your thoughts on Juneteenth becoming a federal holiday?
Man, I got thoughts, man. At the end of the day, on one hand, let me say, all right, Juneteenth as a celebration, as a Black created celebration, as a Black space to celebrate Black joy in the midst of all the chaos is a necessary thing, is a necessary exercise for us as a people. So I'm appreciative on that level. Full stop. What else is there? One of the things that I shared on my social media was, in the midst of calling for protections for the Black vote, in the midst of let's talk about reparations, in the midst of, ending police violence and community violence, in Black communities, what we got was a day off. And I don't understand, on one, and it is, a couple folks have shared the notion that it is a bit of gaslighting to know that bills like HR 1 and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and just somehow unanimously, we're talking all the senators all of a sudden had this mythical awakening, like, you know what, Black folks deserve a holiday. Like,
Yeah.
Look at me, Ted Cruz. Let me pat myself on the back now because I've now given the black people something, even though I'm literally holding up voting protections, I'm holding up reparations, I'm holding up all the things. And just so people understand the technicalities of it, when I say holding up, those bills can't move because there's a failure to agree on getting 60 votes to pass them out. So I want people to understand the mathematics of this. 100 senators passed the Juneteenth, holiday bill, unanimous, right? Everybody got on board with it. But you're telling me that you can't find 10 Republicans that can agree that black voting rights are important. You can't find 10 Republicans that can agree that it's important to provide safety and protective measures for black people against police brutality. You're trying to tell me that you can't find 10 Republicans that, now mind you, 50 Republicans can agree that Juneteenth was a thing, but you can't find 10 Republicans that can agree that we should be, get some sort of compensation for the slavery that Juneteenth, is celebrated. Like it's the irony of it all. It's that sort of paradox that is not lost on me and should not be lost on anybody, because what's going to happen is folks like Marco Rubio, folks like Ted Cruz, folks like Rick Scott are going to walk around and be like, well, look, I voted for Juneteenth, so you should be, look, I did something. And he'd be like, nah, I can't agree. I can't feel you on that. So it's so they can miss me with the demonstrative stuff. I wanna see real substance. I want to see actually y'all do something, like do your job. Like
I feel you. And Rasha, I know that these type of tactics from the U.S. government happen in various communities where you get, a lot of symbolism. How frustrating is that for marginalized communities to want justice, but are always given symbolism as an option?
Honestly, it is performative activism, and it's also moderate Democrats that co-opt the radical movement. Like, we're living in a time where, yes, Juneteenth should be a federal holiday, but we're also talking about how critical race theory is being removed from schools. Like, it's gaslighting, it's deflection. It is absolutely all of that, because while they're doing something surface level, they're actually trying to remove education around what Juneteenth is and what the civil rights movement is, what the struggle continues for Black and Brown communities in this country, what the oppressive systems does. And they're not catering to the demands of the Black liberation movement. So it is absolutely frustrating, because I feel like many times people think of the opposition as being right wing, which they absolutely are. But what sometimes is so much more dangerous is a lot of this performance, because we're still not meeting the demands and the needs of the people.
No, I agree. And, my co-host, because this is this type of co-host I got, he was worried about, he put out a tweet, Alan put out a tweet. He want 1865 in a stimulus check for this holiday. So we talk about, but you raise a question about the importance of economics. It's like we don't want to talk about reparations, but yet still they want to give us symbolism. So I know you were saying it in just, but why is that conversation to you, Alan, important, that we focus on the economics for and the reparations for the atrocities of the actions of slavery?
Yeah, I mean, it's for me, it's all about tangible changes, right? And tangible changes directly to the communities affected the most. Because, anytime that we're talking about federal holidays, mind you, understand federal holidays are not necessarily given at a rapid rate. And I can understand and appreciate some sort of quote unquote acknowledgement. But at the end of the day, a federal holiday doesn't though it acknowledges it on a broad scale, also the people who are reaping the benefits of what you're just giving us, which is a day off, is everybody. So now when we're talking about, when I even said in jest, I need that 1865, of course, the symbol of the year stimulus. I'm talking about let's do something that actually directly affects and rectifies the community that you are acknowledging the wrongdoing of, as opposed to putting, a blanket and allowing everyone to kind of, benefit from you guys' acknowledgement of wrongdoing. So it's a chip. It's a chip in a tree box. So.
Absolutely, and this is the same thing as the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act or the legislation for Breonna Taylor. It's like we can't get justice. I've always said on this podcast, America would get the worst Yelp review from me. Like you keep asking as a restaurant, like we keep asking for things to come to the table. It's like, look, I just want to order a justice and a side. Let me just watch, equality. Let me just do that. Let me just order that. And they just keep bringing. Well, we have this holiday icy. And it's like, yo, I really want some substance. I'm hungry for some substance, and they just keep bringing out like sweets and treats and little appetizers. And so when is it as a community that we are going to take a big bite of that justice apple that other communities get afforded to? And what's more frustrating is that you have, a lot of the blueprint and the activism that, are proposed to get justice, we've created. And so it's like, okay, so it's not the how we're doing it, right? It's basically who the messengers really are when it comes to the justice, because it works fine for other folks. Like Morgan, you were telling me that like before, you were like, hey, the Asian community was getting heat for about a good month. And they were like, yo, we got to get this legislation on and popping. Let's get it. You see what I'm saying? So,
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
And to that end, right, that again goes to the greater frustration.
Correct.
Because when my Asian brothers and sisters, rightfully so, get a bill passed,
absolutely,
the bill ends up passing again like 93-6. I mean 93-6 in the Senate. So that means again you get this overwhelming support that acknowledges the violence being committed against Asian people, and then Black folks are like, so we're talking about violence against groups of people, like.
Yeah,
so
like we didn't march all summer.
I mean, it's like almost like I can see like Ida B. Wells popping up. Like, wait, excuse me, you talking about violence against Black people? Like I definitely went around and documented 5,000 occurrences of violence during my time on this place, and somehow, some way, all that stuff ends up getting kicked off to the side, and it's frustrating. It's a pain, it's a painful re-traumatization, and I can't dismiss that, right?
Yeah.
That people, like the thing about lynchings, the thing about state-based violence against Black people is you've got people who've literally experienced that, and we're talking about we're talking about the Amadou Diallos, we're talking about the all the state violence killings that we know in the modern sense. Mm-hmm. But I'm talking about you still have people that got cracked over the head and got dog sicked on them that are still like getting up every day, like watching this on TV and being like, geez, like how many more presidents do we got to go through? How many more hashtags? How many more marches do we have to do just to get an incremental material change, a material change in our condition? And that's the frustrating part. And then even more so, and I shared this in another thing, even when you do pass something substantive, then what? Because we had a Voting Rights Act that didn't protect Black votes, right? So it's like we're sitting here in 2021 having passed 5 pieces of major civil rights legislation that's supposed to impact the Black vote, including 2 constitutional amendments. And the same group can't protect the Black vote and guarantee the franchise of Black people in 2021, and then say, well, systemic racism doesn't exist. I'm like, I don't understand that. That's the definition. That's the literal definition of systemic racism.
And one of my concerns when I heard about it, I was like, oh, this holiday, the Juneteenth is about to get co-opted. Right, like Juneteenth is about to be Cinco de Mayo for Black. Like you're gonna go.
Walmart is coming. You understand what I'm saying? Like it is about to be official. Like
the marketing of it. Yep.
And the thing about it is, one person put something there, and it frustrated me because they were like, they said, "Man, you are going to get all the smoke if white people treat Juneteenth like Cinco de Mayo. And I was like, you are absolutely correct. Because if I see you in the streets drinking Hennessy with a dashiki on, talking about you celebrating my holiday, you're catching a fade at every Irish pub
correct.
that you reside in. It's a
correct.
wrap.
Correct, man. Yeah, and so that's something that I was definitely concerned with. But we want to make sure that we show love before we go to our next topic. Soapbox Nation, make sure you follow us, Soapboxx Podcast at 2X. That's Soapboxx Podcast with 2X. Make sure you show us some love in the comment section. Shout out to Zoe Dread. He said, yo, what's good? Thank you for tuning in, watching us on the Soapboxx Podcast. And of course, my other brother, for the Multiverse, host of the Multiverse Podcast, says, say it with your chest. What's up, Bad Ty Lee Robinson? Appreciate you tuning in. Rasha, I want to talk to you about Unbought Power. What is, because initially when I heard about Unbought Power, it's not just a podcast. So can you shed some light on what is Unbought Power and what made you start your LLC and what's it all about?
Yeah, so Unbought Power, obviously, Unbought is paying tribute to Shirley Chisholm, who we all know was the first Black woman in Congress who also ran for presidency, who was unbought and unbossed, who didn't, just take corporate PAC money, but she was fighting for Black people and for women. So she was able to attain power without forfeiting her rights and values. So that is where I was inspired, especially in this work where we understand that the electoral process alone will not liberate us. I come from movement, I come from activism, I come from the Palestinian liberation movement. So how do we really inject movement or grassroots organizing into the halls of Congress? How do we continue to center the most marginalized voices? In 2018, we saw the big governor's race in Florida, and where the candidate Andrew Gillum became very anti-Palestinian as someone that threw down for him in the primary, and seeing social justice organizations trying to silence a Palestinian group, right? These were from all groups, right? They didn't want to speak about Palestine, and it became increasingly more anti-Palestinian. So I realized at some point it wasn't just elected officials or politicians that were problematic on progressive issues. It's actually very much so exists in progressive organizations. So I wanted to ensure that I continue to do this work because I'm not going to be pushed out of this work, right? I believe in the freedom and liberation of all people. And I want to continue to do this work where I can go to sleep at night with a full conscience. I can't stop being Palestinian, right? And I wanted to be able to do this work and make sure that with the organization would be like, can you just tone down your Palestinianness just a little bit? I'm not going to do that, right? So being able to still do this work and being unbought like Shirley Chisholm and being able to really pay tribute to the Black and brown women specifically and femme siblings that came before us, right? Like even the Black Palestinian solidarity, like it's not new. We're talking about Malcolm X visiting Palestine, the Middle East, he thought from a global lens. He went to Palestine in 1966. We're talking about George Jackson, that when he was writing poetry or writing stories and reading poetry on Palestine. So when we think about the liberation and freedom for all people, the Black civil rights movement was very much entrenched and believed in global freedom and liberation and very much was interconnected with the Palestinian rights movement. So from Ferguson to Palestine is beautiful. Post George Floyd is powerful and what's inspired what's happening in Palestine now, but it's absolutely not new. And I wanted to make sure that, I recommit to that work and understand that when we're working for the freedom and liberation of one community, it's actually for all of us. So, it's different. It's an LLC, but I'm here and, you've got to continue being unapologetic, or what's the point of being and doing this kind of work?
Hey, I firmly believe in that. So being unapologetic, but you have so it's consulting, but then you also do your own Instagram Live. You do some interviews. You've had some heavy hitters on there now.
Yes, I'm going to my bullet, of course.
Yes, you've had some heavy hitters. How was Congresswoman Omar? How was that interview, and what was that experience like for you?
I mean, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar is, is a Black Muslim sister in hijab that is roaming the halls of Congress as a refugee and is right now being attacked by Florida legislators on the Democratic side. We're talking about Ted Deutsch, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, that are attacking a Black Muslim woman who's vocal and consistent on human rights. And it's vicious, and it brings like this kind of violence into her life that's unnecessary just because she's speaking truth, and she's an easy target because she is Black, she is in a hijab, and she is Muslim. So something about Ilhan Omar, the Congressman Ilhan Omar, is like, she's always just like, don't worry about me, I'm good, you know. But at the end of the day, we have to do, you know. So what we've been trying to do is like nationally run support campaigns. And it's so embarrassing being in the state of Florida because we have Democrats and, you know, movement people that are like endorsing this kind of behavior and encouraging this kind of behavior instead of being on the right side of justice. It's not progressive, right? It's not bold. It's being consistent on our fight for freedom.
I hear you on that. And also, and it's funny you brought that up as far as like the impact of you know, whether you're a Democrat or something, because you get heat. And I don't think a lot of people know, for our audience, for supporting Palestinian issues or Palestinians or just people who are non-white at that point. Senator Dwight Bullitt, you were a former senator. This has affected your support of Palestinian people, has affected your political career. You're now with Florida Rising as a political advisor, as a senior political advisor. But can you elaborate? Can you expound on how this has affected your career when you're speaking out truth to power unapologetically for Palestinians?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like accept the consequences, because I always want to be on the right side of an issue. I always want to stand with the oppressed over the oppressor, and that is and for folks in movement, this is always this kind of like weird nuance that they want to they try to walk in, where they try to keep their toes in two different pools of water. And it's just like, nah, you know, like as Rasha pointed out, I've been a Malcolm X head for, you know, since I was 15, right? And so when you think about the idea that names like, you know, Nelson Mandela or Malcolm X or Desmond Tutu and all these folks who stood in solidarity with Palestinian people, and some have caught flack, some of, you know, I think about, you know, Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney, used to be a congresswoman out of Georgia, caught heat back in the day because, again, you know, she stood in solidarity with Black and brown people, Palestinians explicitly. You know, former Congressman Keith Ellison, who's now the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota, again, has caught flack because he's raising the alarm about the atrocities being committed against a group of people. And the problem that I tend to have in the political space is that if we were saying this about Colombia or Cuba or Venezuela or, you know, heck, Northern Ireland, you know what I mean? Like we can have these broad-based, nuanced conversations about the oppression of people and how regime change and this, that happens in every other space, somehow, except when it comes to Palestinian people. And what I would simply draw the attention to is how white supremacy works. And I remember, like, in preparation for this, I want people to understand this from a larger historical context about global white supremacy, right? Palestine, the land of Palestine, when we think about places like Nazareth, Bethlehem, you've heard these names before, right? You've heard the names before. Most Black people rock with a pretty dope Palestinian cat by the name of Jesus Christ, right? Like they don't want to acknowledge that, but that's who he was, right? He was a Palestinian Jew living in that community. And I say that to say, historically, that has always been the case. The cohesion of Palestinian people from all walks of life, from all religious backgrounds, cohabitating in the space, recognizing the power of those communities. But somehow take it back to, the British occupation of the region following World War I, right? All of a sudden, they're now sitting on this piece of property where brown people are existing. Stop me if this sounds familiar, right? The idea of indigenous people living in a space and then white people coming along and saying that it's not your space to determine your own destiny. We're now going to like reclaim this space for another reason. And in this case, it was to take, folks that had been, suffered horrendous atrocities in Europe and put them into a, geographically put them into a space. But what people don't want to talk about is the unilateral dismissal of the indigenous community that already lived there for the purposes of, quote unquote, protecting another group of people. And that is at the root of the conflict, is that white folks should not have had the opportunity to do that. You should have simply said, hey, listen, there's a region in this world where Jews, Christians, Muslims have lived, as a people collectively since, again, going back to that dope dude, Jesus, the Christ of Nazareth, right?
Yeah.
So why is it now that we're playing politics with two different groups of people and thus creating what, if you go back to 73 years ago, should have been an unnecessary conflict from the get-go? But I digress. I'll turn it back to that dope Palestinian sister, Rasha Mubarak.
Well, Rasha, I put up an image, and I wanted you to kind of, illustrate, exactly what it means for people who aren't familiar with what's going on for foreign issues when it comes to Palestine and Israel. So I don't know if you can see the writing, but I'm just talking about the actual map of itself, and I'm hoping that it's accurate because I try to do my due diligence, my Big J journalism here on the Soapbox. This is what we do, right, Alan? So if you could just explain to people the kind of history of the, let's call it what it is the apartheid of what's going on, correct?
Right. I mean, so most recently, the Human Rights Watch actually have officially called this an apartheid. And again, it shouldn't take we've been calling it an apartheid state since it became an apartheid state in 1948. This is deliberate land theft, land grab, and it comes with this notion of, obviously, we're going to call it what it is. It's not just apartheid. This is settler colonialism. This is state-sanctioned violence. This is white supremacy. This is genocide. And this is absolutely ethnic cleansing. This is it's a deliberate plan on a logic of native elimination, right? That is destroying in order to replace. And somehow here in this country, we've digested this notion that the freedom and liberation of one group comes at the expense of another. I know that Senator Dwight Bullard went into obviously the obvious atrocities of one group, but that shouldn't eliminate an indigenous people to this land. So the fact that my grandfather, Allah yarhamah, may he rest in peace, all of my grandparents are older. We're older than Israel, right? When my dad's siblings, my mom's siblings were born, their birth certificates say Palestine. And to Senator Dwight Bullard's point is that when it was Palestine, Jews, Christians, and Muslims lived in peace. They were business partners. They worked closely together, and Jesus was born in Palestine. There are Palestinian Christians, because many times people try to make this a religious issue, when in reality, this is about human rights. This is about people's land being grabbed and stolen. These are about people that are being forcefully expelled from their homes. And since 1948, this is happening right now. It's happening in the eastern part of Jerusalem, Sheikh Jarrah, Silwan. My parents are from two different villages, Hizma and Beit Hanina. A 29-year-old woman was killed right outside of my dad's village yesterday because there is a checkpoint now. When my dad went and asked for my mother's hand in marriage, he was able to walk to her village. Way back when my dad's village was Jerusalem. But because of this attempt to make it a Jewish supremacist state and city, a lot of the Palestinian villages are now considered West Bank. My mom's village is still considered Jerusalem. There's a checkpoint there. Everyone part of the Palestinian diaspora is a survivor of the settler colonial regime, is still fighting for their land, is still fighting for the homeland. You'll still see Palestinians holding on to their keys. The Palestinian community is the largest refugee community in the entire world. So it is something that we continue to fight for. And that, yes, it's an international issue, it's a global issue, but it's absolutely our issue here, right? Because when we think about taxpayer dollars, we're thinking about 3.8 billion taxpayer dollars here are going to Israel's military. We have people talking about how we want Medicare for all. We want to be able to provide access to people who are experiencing homelessness. We want people to have free college tuition. When we are a country to be able to do that, but not only are we not doing that, we're sending our taxpayer dollars to brutalize an entire people. The Palestinian diaspora has been so dehumanized that we're actually in debate of our experience as an oppressed people, as a displaced people, as a dispossessed people, that there aren't two sides. There's the oppressor, which is Israel, and there's the oppressed, which is the Palestinian people. And of course, there is the U.S. that funds the oppressor with the $3.8 billion and unconditioned support to Israel's military. And I know we're going to get into all of it, but much of our law enforcement agencies, Orlando Police Department, have been trained by IDF, by Israel's defense forces. So when we see the atrocious murder of George Floyd in a chokehold, we understand that that's a tactic. That's the Minnesota police also went to Israel and was trained. So when you see images of young boys being in the same position as George Floyd in Palestine, these are oppressive systems that are not only funded by the US and Israel, but are also trained to do here to kill Black people, that continue to murder Black people in the streets. And a lot of it is, how do we really understand the narrative of Palestine, and how do we understand the narrative of even the Black diaspora here? Many times when Black people are murdered by the police, it's, what did he do? Did he resist? Right? These questions are disgusting, right? Why is that even a question? The state should not be murdering Black people, period. But we've been equipped, because that's what systemic racism does. That's what white supremacy does, to make us think that there was something done by people to deserve to be murdered by the state. And we also, here and in Palestine, there's this natural attempt to create the perfect victim, right? He has nothing on him. He's never been detained. He's never been arrested. In almost saying that, if there was a history of that, it's deserving to be murdered, or literally policing how we fight for our freedom, right? The tone policing here, the tone policing in Palestine, people burning police cars here or looting, it becomes about them telling us that's not how you should react. Telling people how they fight for their freedom, how they resist, how they fight for their liberation, is a tactic that's used to suppress us and silence us, and to be quiet while we're murdered here, while we are oppressed in Palestine. And that's literally because we're talking about peaceful resistance, right? If we have laws here in the state, that in the state of Florida, there's a law in place with anti-BDS legislation. This is actually, I think, where Senator Dwight Bullard was, it's basically criminalizes people who do boycott, divest, and sanction in support of Palestine. Just recently, and not this session, the session before, an anti-Semitism bill passed unanimously across the state of Florida. So both sides of the aisle, all of a sudden, are proud to align with Randy Fine, right? So it doesn't make any sense. And what's happening is that it could criminalize Black and brown folks who are on university campuses, are vocal on Palestinian rights. We already see a case of an FSU student named Ahmed Dadadik, who was unseated as FSU Senate president because of his vocality on his experience as a Palestinian 12-year-old boy living in Palestine, living under Israeli occupation. And, you know, when we think about HB1, right? Yeah, we have a racist governor, right? Absolutely. It's disgusting. We're living in a racist state. But also Florida has a history of passing anti-protest bills, but it's been targeted at silencing Palestinian groups. So this started in 2014 when a resolution was passed. We've seen it happen in 2016 and we've seen it happen in 2019. And here we are now with HB1, where people can literally run people over at a Black Lives Matter protest and not be charged. Like, we also have to understand, like, how the history of the Florida legislature, how Democrats have not only been complicit and complacent, but what accountability looks like for both sides of the aisle, because it's not progressive to say, because I'll stop after this, but a couple years ago, nobody wanted to take a knee. Nobody wanted to say defund the police or abolish ICE or Black Lives Matter, right? We saw Mark Lamont Hill get fired for saying from the river to the sea. And now what we're seeing now is that it's being, once white people say it's okay, once they're starting to feel comfortable with that kind of resistance, is like when they're literally policing us on how we fight for our freedom and liberation and telling us what our justice looks like.
Yeah, no, look, I told y'all, Soapboxx Nation, I told y'all we had the right one. All right. This is a year of me shucking and jiving for this opportunity for us to get this teachable moment. So I told y'all we had the right one. But I definitely want, you definitely said a lot and gave us a lot of meat to chew on. But I want us to further unpack that for anybody who's like views this video down the road, or people that may want some clarification on things. So Alan, I know you had a question.
Well, I mean, I have a new question, actually, just kind of listening to how you put the parallels in the policing between, you know, the U.S. police and, you know, the Israeli police and the training and things of that nature. I would really like to know your opinion on abolition, and how far would you like to see it go, both domestically and internationally, since there is that chain?
So is that for Rasha, for me?
I mean, both of you. And when I say
we throw alley-oops on this
both
show.
of you. Yeah. When I say abolition, just to be clear, the abolition of the current police system, which, like I said, it seems that it needs to be rooted from the ground up globally and not just domestically. So but I would love to hear from both of you guys.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, this is just the reality of the history of policing in America. It's rooted in white supremacist racism, right? Like, that is the construct. I think, and I say that, and I repeat it whenever platform I'm on, so people can fully appreciate where we're at, because you also hear all these, like, you know, Black folks, we have this weird relationship with the police. We should not have some love-hate relationship with the police. It should always be on the side of not liking policing, because policing has always been essentially to police Black bodies from jump, right? Like, out west, it was to police indigenous and Asian bodies. Down south, it was to police Black bodies. In the Northeast, it was to police and make sure Black bodies could not interact with this growing, you know, the growing economic systems of the Northeast in terms of banking, steel, et cetera, right? So, you know, that is why you get the expansion of police forces. Just so people understand this, the existence of a SWAT team, Special Weapons and Tactics, only happens in reaction to the Black Panther Party. Let me say that again for folks in the cheap seats, right? We wouldn't have SWAT teams in existence today had it not been for the existence of the Black Panther Party and this hysterical notion that armed Blacks needed to be put down, and we needed to have a special system in place to do so, right? So when people are like, this has been around, and this SWAT teams don't appear on any police force until after 1967.
Mm-hmm.
So this is only a 50-year experiment in violence explicitly against Black people. So I say that to say to Alan's question, the North Star, the goal, should be a system of abolition, self-preservation, self-protection amongst community. And I want to remind people that for the first 150 years of the American experiment, that's what it was. You know what I'm saying? Like this idea of expanded police force, militarized police force, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is all new. And then it gets exacerbated when folks come around and say, we have to have a war against drugs. We should have a war against drugs. Like, I want you to think about when, like, the Reagan Bush era folks come around and say that we need to have a war against drugs. Like, at that moment, they're basically declaring war on the Black community. But mind you, historical footnote, they were the ones who put the drugs there in the first place. So it's almost like that whole conversation around weapons of mass destruction and Iraq, right? It's like the reason that George W. Bush can go into Iraq and say that they're weapons of mass destruction is because Papa Bush gave the weapons of mass destruction to Saddam Hussein in the first place. So it's basically dad saying,
supplier.
I was the plug.
Yeah.
I need you to go in there and get my, he can't say he didn't have them because I definitely gave it to him and I got receipts. Like, that's how the white supremacist system of violence against Black and brown communities continues to perpetuate itself and grow. And then what ends up happening is we have these co-conspirators within the Black community. They're like, well, this is the way it's got to be. You know what I mean? Like, we've had no other place like that. If you look at the most recent documentary about Black towns that came out of, that ultimately ended up in Tulsa, just to give you an example, Black folks moved to what eventually became Oklahoma as a means of self-protection because every state in the Union had committed violence against them. The one time they found peace, right, collective peace, was in solidarity amongst indigenous people, and there was a moment of self-protection that you could create because there were no state laws imposed on these Black people to govern themselves in any particular way, no Jim Crow. The second Oklahoma becomes a state is the second Oklahoma becomes racist towards Black people. So I want you to think about this. We would not have a Tulsa race massacre if Oklahoma as a state had never existed to begin with. Right? And so when we think about the concept of abolition, we have to understand that there are already historical reference points to us being able to govern ourselves as community in a responsible way. But the imposition that we've been faced with is basically white supremacists in all its forms, putting all the tools for self-destruction, whether it is the presence of guns, drugs, economic lack of economic empowerment, all of the things. And then they turn around having thrown the rock with their hand and being like, who did that?
Yeah.
Who did that? Oh, but if you need us to clean it up, we'll do that too. You know what I'm saying? And we'll since you can't, since we've done all this to you, you can't govern yourselves. We'll continue to just keep, beating you over the head with different things. So I'm here for the global abolition of the oppressive systems that have, put us in in the straitjacket that we find ourselves in right now. And that, again, globally, because that also impacts, again, going back to Palestine, going back to South and Central America, going back to all these places. Whenever you see kind of the introduction of violent white supremacy into these spaces is the second you start to see, these like mushrooming systems of oppression impacting Black and brown people globally.
That's definitely powerful, man. I appreciate all that information. I do want to ask you, Rasha, because I want to touch base on it, because I want people to understand, because this is something I've seen in the media, and this actually happened on the Soapboxx too, right? So we posted about Palestine and Israel on our Instagram page, and we called it a conflict, right? And I know then I had a Palestinian young woman. She commented, it was like, it's not a conflict. But that's all I've always heard was conflict. Can you explain to Soapboxx Nation why it's offensive? And I know you touched on it briefly, but why is it offensive to, or I would say journalistically inaccurate to call what's going on between Israel and Palestine a conflict that you see in most national media headlines?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. First, I just want to say I'm an abolitionist, period. I just think we have to stop being scared or, be unafraid of how we talk about it. And that's why we continue to lose, especially in Florida, is because we keep trying to cater to a base that's never going to be for us. But yeah, so I think conflict is absolutely inaccurate. It's incorrect. It's not a true depiction of what it is. Again, we went over it 73 years of erasure of the Palestinian people. When we talk about the school to prison pipeline, or we're talking about not because there's mass incarceration because they really believe that people committed all these crimes, but it's a way to suppress, right? And when you're talking about the resistance in Palestine, they want to be able to talk about it as if it's an even level playing field, right? So when you detain a 12-year-old Palestinian boy at 3:00 in the morning, it's not because you really believe that he threw a rock at a U.S. military tank. It's because you detain him to shatter his dreams, to dehumanize him, and to devalue his humanity, to thinking that he shouldn't be exploring a future in education or what he wants to do with his life. So when we think about these systems here and how it impacts Black and brown people here and the systems there, it's not an even level playing field, right? These are systems of power. So when we're talking about legislators here that are part of decision making, even them, they're not, the way that they communicate to their constituents here, they have to understand that there is a power dynamic. When you're thinking about Israel, again, they are the oppressor and the Palestinians are oppressed. They are, they have a full military, one of the strongest, if not the strongest military in the world, that is weaponized by how we talk about this issue. I remember growing up, like I was born into the diaspora, right? Like all I knew was going downtown Orlando and protesting for my people's liberation. And I just remember like how the news would cover it, right? They would talk about as if these two people were equal. And even the way they described like the murder and killings of Palestinians, they would use the words like died. 12 Palestinians died today, like as if they just like had natural like deaths. And then if like an Israeli was killed, it'd be murdered, slaughtered, brutalized. And it's like all this language that's like to depict it. And it's like, wait a minute, like even how I learned on early on how like that the way they talk about it is not accidental, it is deliberate. So that's why you'll be asked like, Russia, but what do you think about a two-state resolution? Do you believe Israel has a right to exist? And then there's these questions that are in place that if you're not well-versed in it, that can automatically deem you as anti-Semites, like an anti-Semite, versus the issue of Israel occupying, displacing, dispossessing the Palestinian people. So we are absolutely intentional with how we talk about it. We're calling it what it is. We're saying this is ethnic cleansing. When 200 people were murdered in Gaza just 2 weeks ago, that's not a conflict. That's genocide, right? That is deliberate. Gaza, just to be clear, is the largest open air prison in the world, where Israel controls even how much calorie intake the people of Gaza consume, how much food goes into Gaza. They occupy the sea. So when we're talking about climate justice or LGBTQ rights and immigrant rights, we're talking about how Palestine is interconnected, because the wall that Trump wanted to build to keep Mexicans out is the same companies that built the apartheid, the oppressive wall in Palestine and Palestine. When we're talking about climate justice, we're talking about how in Palestine, the Palestinians don't have the right to movement, don't have the right to the natural land and the sea, the agricultural occupation and oppression. So absolutely, this is not a conflict. This is deliberate to create a state of Jewish supremacy and trying to erase, displace, and dispossess the Palestinian people.
No, I'm glad you touched on it, because one of the influence, because that has, and I see certain correlations, right? Because I know with activists, and whether you're a Black Lives Matter activist and you're in the organization, or you're an activist that happens to be Black, you're always being criminalized for no matter what you do, especially when it comes to our direct actions. But on this, we've talked about it on the show about the new trend, which is, well, not a new trend for some, but it's picking up steam to call it pull-up summer, right? So we're seeing now that activists, especially in the Black community, instead of us marching downtown and marching in circles, we're basically pulling up to these white supremacists' house. We're pulling up to these law enforcement officers' house to go right directly to their door. We're protesting sheriffs and stuff like that. So we're all for that pull-up summer. I do want to talk to you about the fact that you're using the pull-up summer, but more so in a direct actions to our politicians to hold them accountable. And I wanted to talk to you about like what was your initial thought process? Because I know you've done it with a couple politicians here in Florida specifically. What was the end goal for you in that? Because I know even in Orange County, they're trying to create legislation now, or ordinances in Orange County, to prevent activists from even going to different houses in Orange County. And they're using the fact that I led a protest to Derek Chauvin's house, who's a murderer. They're literally using that as an example as to why we shouldn't allow, and this is being pushed by our Orange County mayor, and it's also being pushed by our Orange County sheriff in Orlando, for those who are listening to us abroad here in Florida. So what does pull-up summer mean to you in your space when it comes to Palestinian activism on this issue?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think much like pull-up summer, I think, for a lot of us, we're drawing a line in the sand. You're either for justice and liberation and equity for all people, or you're not. There's no in between, right? Like, you can't be like, Black Lives Matter, but I don't know about defund the police. You can't be like for immigrant rights, but I don't know about abolishing ICE, right? You cannot keep equating, you cannot keep talking about Palestine from a lens of two sides, or that it's complicated, right? And I think Florida is so violent for Black, brown, indigenous, queer, Latinx folks. And it is absolutely violent for the Palestinian community, because what we see when it comes for the Palestinian liberation movement is that both sides of the aisle are on the same side, right? Like they're siding with Randy Fine. They're siding with we see Congresswoman Val Demings quiet, right, on the issue of Palestine. Congressman Darren Soto quiet until we showed up at his office. I think when we talk about, and it's not, I want to be clear, it's not just elected officials, that it is also pushback from organizations and movement folks, because there's this facade that these folks are allies and friends. They are not allies to the Palestinian people. And the Florida legislature, they passed the anti-Semitism bill unanimously, which is an anti-Palestinian bill. When you think of the intention of Randy Fine, he wanted to criminalize and silence BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions, pro-Palestinians. He's literally on Twitter, he's like, this is what it was for. Like, he's absolutely underscoring it and highlighting it. So in our petition, we didn't, we understand that there's a problem, and from the problems derive and extract issues. Right? The problem is racism, but from racism comes police brutality, right? So we understand that the problem is occupation and oppression and funding this Israel's military aid. but we want to talk specific. Like, these are our demands for our congressional leaders, and these are our demands for the state legislator, because everybody has a responsibility in this. This gaslight and deflection that state legislators have no decision making in foreign affairs is absolutely untrue. First of all, everybody has a platform, and if you are an elected official, you are absolutely should be condemning any kind of genocide against a people, and they do. That's one, and we understand that people follow the lead. Secondly, you shouldn't be proudly and boldly passing legislation that criminalizes all of these young activists' voice for trying to free Palestine. So you not only are you silent, but you have helped pass violent legislation, right? And so that's literally what it is. And when I talk about these movement organizations, these organizations do 3-day trainings about relationship building, coalition building, accountability processes, agitation within the movement, right? But when it comes to Palestine, they want to tell us, but maybe your strategy isn't the right strategy. Like, you don't get to tell the marginalized group how to fight for their freedom and liberation. We're literally delivering papers to our elected officials who work for us, right? And that's not revolutionary, right? Like, but it is absolutely unconventional in the state of Florida, because progressive, moderate Dems, social justice orgs have never been challenged. We live in this echo chamber and ecosystem where we continue to, applaud each other, high five each other, because we're doing surface level things. But once we challenge them and hold them accountable and ask for demands, it's somehow offensive, and it's no longer about the issue of the plight for liberation for the Palestinian people. So I'm very proud, absolutely proud for the organizations, the individuals, the 1,600 petition signatories, the over 20 organizations that have signed on, because they're literally choosing to not, because we understand, like, the fight for freedom, it shouldn't be comfortable, right? Like, it shouldn't be like painting Black Lives Matter on the street when white people are ready to do so, right? And using funds from, like, the transportation. Like, it's just, we're living in a world where the oppressors, the people that support oppressive systems, whether directly or indirectly, are telling us how to fight for our freedom and liberation. So it's not, I'm so proud of the young organizers, I have to say, because they're pushing back. They're unafraid in challenging people that have been deemed progressive, and are fighting for their liberation and freedom and their right to boycott and divest and sanction in the state of Florida.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. Oh, there it is. I was like, oh, where did the white?
Oh my gosh, I scared the senator away.
Oh yeah, I was like, oh, she pulled. Listen, I'm gonna tell you. So Alan and Morgan, just so y'all know, she's like, what she's saying, she's putting on wax. Look, I was just minding my business on the social media streets, and then I saw this, right? And this is Rasha pulled up on Representative Carlos Guillermo Smith, which I was shocked, because Representative Smith has always been someone that's been vocal on issues. And I actually thought, and this is where she talks about not being in a clique, and I thought everybody was friends in these streets. So when I see things, I called the white, and I was like, listen, Rasha out here doing things I would do. What's going on? I said, what's going on? But I wanted to ask you, and I would be remiss if I didn't, Rasha, like, what went, because I know there was an exchange, and I'm not going to get into the actual words with it, but you were disappointed by the interaction. I thought everybody was cool, but like, what made it, what happened where it went left, where it went from delivering petitions to now we're having like Twitter beef, and we're having we're having conflict. What was that? If you could just explain, because people saw it on social media. Like, I wasn't the only one. I called the white, like, yo, what is this? Like, this is, but then I equated it to Pull Up Summer. And I know when I did this, but I did it to another activist, I had gotten heat, and I was in the right, and they found out I was in the right. So, and it speaks to how people perceive you when you are deemed as, it's people get very cliquish. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity, Rasha, to just like, what went left in that situation? And in a retrospect, is there anything that you would like change? Are you good with it? Or like, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, Senator Dwight Blur and I talk about how we would do things over and over and over again, the same. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm Palestinian, and while there's Palestinians that, are Muslim, Christian, whatever it is, don't believe in God, I am God-fearing, right? Like for me, like we're all gonna die. I'm not trying to be morbid, but like the only person I'm gonna answer to is God, right? So for me, I'm not gonna be scared of legislators. It's not about that. It's about a people's struggle. It's unfortunate that, two legislators have been able to center themselves when Gaza is being bombed. I don't mind the personal attacks because that exposes deflection and gaslighting. But absolutely, our coalition is focused on, the petition delivery. Rep. Carlos Smith he was petition delivery 5, like on the flyer, right? There's 10 petition deliveries. I'm quoted in the Orlando Sentinel saying that Congresswoman Val Demings has blood on her hands. I don't see her crying on Twitter, right? It's what activists and organizers do. So there's simple demands for the state reps and state senators. One was to acknowledge the harm of HB 741, which is the anti-Semitism bill, for passing it unanimously and for potentially for many young people on campuses that include Black, Brown, Indigenous, queer folk, that if they are vocal on Palestine, that they could be criminalized. And we're already seeing a case of Ahmed Dadadik again in FSU. So that demand was to acknowledge the harm and to stand in solidarity with Ahmed Dadadik. That was the second demand. The first demand was to make an official condemnation of Israel's atrocities against the Palestinian people. So they haven't done that. And so absolutely it's disappointing. Their reaction is on them. Obviously, we had other reactions. Congresswoman Val Demings and Stephanie Murphy both called Orlando Police Department. We were greeted with that. Congressman, like in the.
Did you get to speak with other politicians besides Representative Smith?
So what I was going to say, Congressman Darren Soto, because to be clear, like, yes, I like the pull-up name. All of these people were notified before. Carlos got a text message from me the night before. Congressman Darren Soto's staff did. We went to Congressman Val Demings' office the day before. I spoke with her staff. She's like, Rasha, it's good to see you. But the next day it was the Orlando Police Department.
It's so like, you don't know me. Oh, now you don't know me when I pull up with you.
Congressman Darren Soto, his staff actually greeted us, listened to us, and it was like, this is what's beautiful about America, right? Like that kind of reaction. And then read a letter from Congressman Darren Soto. And then organizers, impacted people shared their concerns with either the letter or where Congressman Darren Soto still continues to take AIPAC money. So it was their elected officials also have to understand that they hold a power and that constituents, residents, voters get to hold you accountable, and it's okay. So, I mean, that's what happened. I think specifically you're asking about Rep. Carlos Guillermo Smith's office, is that the organizers were not having how he was responding. It was more defensive than listening to the impacted people, listening to the Palestinian diaspora and our co-strugglers, that these are young organizers that not only stomped for them before that they could vote, right? Like they door knocked, they canvassed. And absolutely, if the young organizers are more disappointed in progressive elected officials, that's because they put energy and resources and money to elect those progressive peoples with the hope and expectation that they would represent them in the state legislature, represent them in Congress, but most certainly not be a part of legislation that inflicted violence on them.
Yeah. Look, when I saw the picture of the hands folded, I was like, oh, my mom's done that to me. So I know that means business. That means I did something that I wasn't supposed to do. But yeah, I mean, look, I've always said. I just
want to say at that point, him and his staff, and I'm saying this, almost closed the door on my fingers. Had I not moved my hand fast enough, I probably would be missing fingers today. I'm not trying to be dramatic. Like, my people are dying, so that's fine. But also what he did was that young man that was standing next to me, he told that young man, oh, I know you're sincere. This person is not. So that young man was like, you're not going to divide the Palestinian movement. Like, do you know us? Like, we're resilient, we're resistant, and we're absolutely going to be united on a front.
Well, I hope that one day you guys are afforded the opportunity, whether it's a panel or a platform, that y'all can at least have your ideals, because, you know, from comments that I saw on social media, he's Representative Swiss, like, look, I've been an ally, I've been outspoken. And then for me, I was like, you know, I thought everybody was cool, but I just from the outside looking in. So I was like, hey, I don't want no smoke. So I was like, look, I'll ask. People knew that you were coming on, so I was like, look, I'm not. Our show is never the one that's going to brush things on the rug. We're gonna ask, but I definitely want to know as we are coming towards the back nine of the conversation. You guys are definitely welcome to definitely come back. But I wanted to ask both you and Senator Dwight Bullard. Joe Biden, President Joe Biden. We see the legislation that he's, with the Juneteenth and all stuff. Like, what do you want to see? And I'll start with you, Senator Dwight Bullard. What would you want to see President Joe Biden to do or intervene in the apartheid of Palestinian people and the funding of Israel? To continue to, what we're hearing is oppress people from their homes, or really try to erase them from humanity. What should the 46th president of the United States, what should his response be?
So minimally, right? The Obama administration recognized settler colonialism and the fact that these folks were moving into Palestinian occupied lands and snatching their land from them. Like, they went before the United Nations and recognized that towards the end of the Obama administration. Minimally, that's what they did, right? Mm-hmm. The idea that that Obama's vice president has not been able to even be vocal on that minimalist position should be illuminating and disturbing for a lot of people. Bottom line, right? Joe Biden has made comments in the past where he has said that, hey, he's a Zionist, that he believes in what the state of Israel is doing to defend itself or protect it, or whatever language he wants to use. The people that he's put in place that would be, his go-tos are very much of a pro-Israeli mindset. So I have no expectations that he or his administration are any more committed to the safety and livelihood of Palestinian people than any of the other previous administrations, Republican or Democrat. Unfortunately, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that on this issue, he's just not good on even understanding the nuances. He is very much affirmed on kind of one side of the issue. Mm-hmm. What I would, if I was going to use this platform, and this is the first time I'm really speaking on a platform about it, was to share a piece of my own experience in traveling to Palestine, right?
Yes, please do.
People are always like, as soon as I came back, I got the attacks, right? Like, you were there, you were meeting with terrorists, you're a terrible human being for ever having set foot into these places. What I went over there to experience was an amazing art and culture space, that the Palestinian people are dynamic in this regard. Because this is the sad part of not being able to hear the Palestinian story, is that, like, these are people who, in spite of the most atrocious of treatments, are living their best possible lives given the conditions that they're in, right? I'm talking about amazing cooks, amazing artists, both visual, spoken word, you name it. Folks who are trying to engage in human rights and civil rights under the most oppressive of circumstances that anyone could be, associated with. I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. You have a homeowner that, because of the checkpoint that governs the home, the community that she lives in, cannot use her own front door because the government says that she can't use her own front door because it's on the wrong side of her house, and thus has to go take a 10-minute journey every day coming in and going
What?
in order to access the backside of her home just to get home every day. You know what I'm saying? Like, but one particular moment that is always a standout moment for me was going through a checkpoint, to visit what is an area known as Shahada Street. You can definitely, Google and check out Shahada Street in terms of what has happened there historically. But
Yes.
in the isolation of this moment, we're there. It's a group of us. We're walking up the street. Our Palestinian guide, who's there with us, says, "I can't go any further." I'm like, "What the hell do you like?" I'm mind you, we're talking about a street. We're talking I Drive. We're talking,
Yeah.
125th Street in Harlem. We're talking about a regular ass street, right?
Yeah.
Our guide says, "I can't go any further. They won't let me walk any further past this street." Again. So the IDF soldiers come up, start asking us for our passports, right? Like on a street. This is just crazy. I'm like, at this point, I'm like, this is nuts. Like, you're telling me the only distinction between me and him is the kind of paper I'm carrying, right? So we give the passports. Our guy's like, "Yeah, I have to stay right here." All of a sudden, speaking of pull up, all of a sudden, an occupier, if you will, pulls up in his ATV. On him is a 9mm. Now, mind you, nobody there is armed. It's just the soldiers got guns. This guy's got guns. He starts proceeding to tell the soldiers, this dude who's already said, I can't go any further. He's like, "This person in particular needs to die, and you all need to kill him."
Just like that?
Just like that. Just like that. Like, he shouldn't even be here. He should die. So at that point, we're all rallying around like, "Yo, this is extraordinary circumstances. No, sir, you're not going to harm this man who's done nothing to anybody." He then goes and starts looking for his own AR-15, right? The same guy with the 9mm gets his own AR-15 and then starts to encourage the soldiers to now kill all of us, right? He's like,
"Wow,
this is what it should be. Like, they shouldn't be here. This person shouldn't be here. Those people shouldn't be here. None of y'all should be here. Y'all need to kill these people." And like, I want you to think about this, right? I want you to think about that from an American perspective during the protest that happened this last summer. Imagine somebody, white nationalists, whomever, being able to walk up to police officers, soldiers, or whomever, say you need to kill those black protesters, and then the idea that that person is contemplating it, right? Like, contemplating it in that moment and how that's going to impact and affect you. So I share that. It's the first time I've shared it in a public domain because people automatically jump to the conclusion that because I went, that I'm somehow anti-Semitic or anti-Israeli, whatever the case may be. I was there for a good time, and it was a good time that was had until this moment in which I could have died on a street for no other reason than just being a brown person in another country. And when I came back and I did share with a few people who were, again, of the pro-Israel ilk, it was still like, to Rash's earlier point, so what did you do? What did you say to antagonize these soldiers or that man on that street that would lead? Excuse me. I got on a plane. I went to a space, and I tried to defend another human being's life. And the idea that you're okay with asking me what the hell I did tells me everything I need to know about how little you know about the value of human life and the value of this issue. And for that reason alone, I feel every sense of vindication about the stances I took subsequently. But what I would say to that is, I don't want you to understand the dynamics of this scenario.
Yeah.
The tour guide noted that at the end of the street was a graveyard that his parents were buried in, that he cannot visit because of the occupation of that space. That means that there's no note that can be written, there is no document that he can provide that somehow, would allow him the opportunity to lay flowers at his parents' grave site in a space where he is the indigenous human being, and somebody has made a law now barring him from the ability to do that with no special circumstance, no nothing, right?
Yeah.
Like the idea that you don't even have that. And so I share that simply to give people the understanding that this shit is real for people. Like for the Palestinian people, this is an everyday lived life experience to live in an oppressive condition in which, to Rash's earlier point, people have outlived this. This is only a 73-year thing, right? So you have people that once were able to do something in their youth that are not able to do that now because of this. And so to the point around Joe Biden, the idea that $3.8 billion in taxpayer dollars could potentially go there, that he has been willing and is still willing to authorize a $735 million sale of arms, to those forces, again, that are going, they're not being used, understand, it's not like they're going to be used on some war that they're fighting someplace else.
Yeah.
They're asking for armament, they're asking for weapons to do bad things to people who live there. And I need Black folks to understand that if we're going to sit there and be mad about the militarization of police in our own backyards, then we also have to understand that correlation between the lived experience of Palestinian people in the global community, and understanding that it's a larger oppressive system. So going back, and I just want to drive this point home, we could have sat on this and had this conversation about Colombia, about Mexico, about the Cuban conflict, about any other place in the world. And guess what you would get? Minimal to no clapback. But the mere fact that you were courageous enough to have this conversation now puts you in the awkward position of getting all the smoke from people who are saying you should not have even talked about it in a place where you don't get a balanced discussion about it to begin with. So the idea that you are even allowing the space for Palestinian people to talk about their lived experience means that somebody on the other side is going to be like, TJ, you were dead ass wrong for that. Yeah. I want you to think about, I need the folks out there to appreciate that idea. Just the mere fact that you gave a platform, right, is reason enough for somebody to be like, that shouldn't be the case. Even though you can get a platform to 99.9% of any other subject matter to talk about. Like you could bring a white supremacist on and a Black preacher, be fine. Yeah. But all of a sudden, because you had this conversation, you have now officially entered the smoke section.
Oh, okay. Well, we call the smoke section on the soapbox home. Ain't that right, Alan? We want all the smoke. But like, I think it speaks to you, and I'm gonna get your stance, Rasha, is we've never been afraid of having conversations or even having discourse, even when we talk about LGBTQ issues, or we talk about police killing unarmed Black people, or any sort of issues. We definitely, that's what the soapbox is for, and that you can be unapologetic about it and really speak truth to power. And you can't really cancel a boss because we don't really answer to nobody. So that's the whole purpose of supporting independent Black media. That's why I'm grateful to have Morgan here. That's why I'm grateful to have Alan by my side, and grateful to have you two as guests, because we can speak unapologetic. That most mainstream, you don't hear these conversations. So I appreciate you acknowledging that. But Rasha, I want to get your stance, because I want to know, like, is there a legislation that's being pushed currently on the federal level that we should be looking out for, that people should also support, or what is it that you would like, or what needs to, not what you would like, what needs to be happen on a federal level from President Joe Biden or from Congress at this point?
Whew.
I know that's loaded. I know that was a loaded question. And this won't be the only. Trust me, this won't be the only conversation we have on this. This is going to be an ongoing thing. So please, wrap it with us.
Well, I just want to say, like, as Palestinians, like, we know that it could compromise, like, Black people's career, their livelihood, right? And like, seen it with white before it was trending, right? And then we've seen it with Mark Lamont Hill. We see it with Dr. Angela Davis, where even people try to strip her of human rights awards, right? But also, like, George Floyd's face painted on the apartheid wall is like, we believe in, like, when you're talking about, like, oh, let's show you threw down with me, is because I believe in the liberation of Black people, right? And I understand what that means, right? From a global lens, I understand how white supremacy and settler colonialism and racist oppressive systems are not just overt, right? And how, to Dwight's point, it trickles down to daily life for Black people here, daily life for Palestinians. When we talk about Ferguson to Palestine and the Palestinians, on Twitter teaching the Black protesters and their co-strugglers in the streets of Ferguson how to get rid of the tear gas from their eyes, is because this is real, right? Like, it's everyday life. And I want to say, like, I appreciate you all at Soapboxx for creating a space, right? Because it's very easy and sticky to say, that to fall into tactics and to deter away from the issue of, like, this human rights fight. Like, this is about people's humanity, and the fact that people can manipulate it and to think otherwise, it's not just frustrating, it's infuriating, and it's disgusting. So right now but I also want to say, like, speaking of Ferguson and all of that, is like, what we are seeing is the Cori Bushes of the world in Congress, right? Like, we see Ilhan Omar, we see Rashida Tlaib, we see Ayanna Pressley, we see AOC, and, like, not that we celebrate elected officials, but, like, they're speaking truth to power, and they're saying all of us or none of us. And that's what the streets need to be saying. That's what people in Congress need to be saying. That's what people here in Florida need to be saying, because that's what it should be about. So there is federal legislation that's, like, so simple and so straightforward to elevating and centering the human rights of Palestinian children and families, that somehow that's offensive to the Zionist movement here, right? So Congresswoman Betty McCollum, also from Minnesota, she has put forward the Palestinian Children Families Act. In response to that, just a few weeks before, the land theft and land grab of Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan, and then the bombs over Gaza, in response to that, 330 members of Congress, so that includes a whole of Democrats, right? 70% of Congress above signed a letter that they will not condition aid to Israel, which included Val Demings, it included Darren Soto, it included Stephanie Murphy, it included, obviously, Ted Deutsch, the bully on campus, it included all of Florida congressional leaders, right? And so one of our demands to the congressional leaders was to sign Betty McCollum's bill. Not only have they not signed Betty McCollum's bill, they signed Ted Deutsch's letter to not condition aid to Israel. Like, people are experiencing homelessness, and we all understand, right? Like, the pandemic, it disproportionately impacted the Black community, right? Not because Black and brown people, they don't know how to go get vaccinated or go see a doctor, but because the systemic racism trickles down into how people are seen by doctors, how the access, right? So when we're talking about like disproportionate impact and how it impacts daily life, how it impacted it in a pandemic, it's also like the same in Palestine, right? The medical apartheid, Palestinians were not had no access. In fact, that they were prevented from getting vaccinated, right? So like when we talk about these things, we're not just talking about like stop murdering Black people or stop killing Palestinians, and we're talking about how this impacts daily life, how it trickles down to family life, how we can't even reimagine a world free of police. We can't even imagine a world where you don't have to sit down with your son and tell him about what police interaction will be like for him. And for Palestinians growing up, it's like, oh, that person was killed and murdered by Israel. It's okay. We mourn all Palestinian murders and life, right? Like that's how I grew up, right? Like don't just cry when you cry about this cousin that was murdered. You're crying about all of the diaspora, right? He's not special. Like your cousin that was murdered, his life is not more valuable than the other Palestinians murdered. And it's like, why, like to grow up with that mentality is like heart-wrenching, but like it's not exclusive to so many communities globally. So yeah, I encourage our congressional leaders, right, to sign on to Betty McCollum's bill, but we're also seeing how Black and brown people that are vocal on human rights, consistent on human rights, that's inclusive of Palestinians, are attacked, many times unseated, many times fired, many times disparaged. And I just want to say, like, we see you, we love you, and we appreciate you. And even this space, thank you so much.
Oh, not a problem. I do want, and I know we're going to go to our weekly segment, which is Moral of the Story next. But this week, and I wanted to touch on this, and I know we're about to wrap, but this week alone, we've had this huge conversation about colorism, right? And especially specifically in the Latinx community. I was taught that term, exactly what it meant. So I'm using it now. So I was told some people get offended by that, some people don't, but I think it's appropriate. I'm going to use Latinx, right? With the movie In Your Heights that came out on HBO Max, which is a dope movie, by the way. If anybody wants to know, I did a review on it on the Soapboxx Podcast. You can go check that out.
Shout out to Lin-Manuel Miranda for
little cheap plug it. And also Alexander. I don't know if y'all seen Alexander Hamilton. That's on Disney, but that's dope too. All right, so but yeah, I digress. But there's been this conversation of Black Latinos, Black Latinx people. So I wanted to get your thoughts, both you and Dwight. I know you mentioned Black Palestinians, but when you think of Palestinians, you don't always, the Black Palestinian stories or their plight is not always to the forefront of the national conversation. So I want to know, how do you address, Rasha, colorism in, whether it's in the Muslim community or the Palestinian space, when it comes to activism and making sure that they're also included in this fight for freedom?
Yeah, so to your point, there are Black Palestinians, Afro-Palestinians. That's Palestine, right? And Muslims, the Black community is the largest Muslim population in this country. But anti-Blackness is absolutely real in all of these spaces. So post George Floyd, a few of us Palestinian and Arabs, even though there are Black and Afro Arabs, it was specifically non-Black Arabs that we put out, basically Arabs for Black Lives, and educated our community about the anti-Blackness that exists within our communities, within our households, within our families. We also have people that, most of the Palestinian diaspora activists, organizers that are deeply rooted in resistance work. They understand what the Black liberation movement is, but we also have people that are anti-Black and overtly, covertly. We have people from our community that go into Black neighborhoods and put up their liquor stores, put up their grocery stores, and then inflict violence right? In many forms, in many ways, call the police. So there's actual organizations that, you know, we support, and we have them train, whether they're masajid, mosques, Arab specific community, because there's Arab Christians, specific. There's an Iman organization based out of Atlanta, of course, and Chicago, but they do national work where training actual people specifically in grocery stores, right, that are popping up in Black neighborhoods. Like, one, that's already problematic. Two, like getting them to understand, right? So there is a lot of learning and unlearning within our communities. We also know that in Palestine, there is an anti-Blackness, right? So they have one layer of being Palestinian oppressed under Israeli occupation, and then they also have anti-Blackness within their own Palestinian community. So this is something that we continue to address, will address, and you know, it is absolutely needs to be addressed within the Muslim community. There's a lot of anti-Blackness. So especially in Florida, right? It's getting, we had an imam, which is like clergy person, sit with a white Muslim convert, talk about how Black History Month isn't important anymore, and it causes more division. Like, first of all, so like, and I remember being in a group and like none of the Arab men spoke up, right? And the Black Muslims are like, "Oh, y'all quiet now." So it's definitely something that has been around and continues to be around, and that's something that needs to be addressed, and the work needs to be done, and the burden is on non-Black Arabs, non-Black Muslims.
Appreciate your stance on that. Listen, we will definitely continue this conversation. And both Senator Dwight Bullard and Rasha, thank you so much for being here. Y'all will definitely be back on our show on the Soapbox. The way we wrap things up all week, and I'm gonna start with A, so he can show everybody how it's done, right? So he gets some bars. We have the segment called Moral of the Story. It's really how we tie a nice little bow around the conversation. This is your opportunity to plug your social media accounts or anything up and coming events that you have going on. So we're gonna go around the horn. I'm going to start with Alan York. What's your moral of the story, my brother?
Peace. Yo, first and foremost, I would like to thank the guests for coming on tonight. We greatly appreciate you coming in and expanding our knowledge base in regards to the what's going on with our Palestinian brothers and sisters. So first and foremost, I wanted to say thank you. In regards to the moral of the story, to piggyback off that, the moral of the story today for me will be make sure that everyone out there do not conflate conflict with oppression. Do not conflate conflict with oppression. You got to know when there's a difference. So it's important that our language is correct when we're speaking in regards to these things in all aspects. So, you know, like I said, I appreciate you guys for shedding that light, and that's my moral of the story.
Word, appreciate that, brother. Morgan, let's give a round of applause for Morgan. Morgan, our co-host, Giovanni and Jesse had some family issues, and we're with them. But Morgan as well. Morgan stepped up every time for the Soapbox when called on a short notice. I appreciate it because we want to make sure that we have women's voices. We don't want to be another male-dominated podcast that, you know, we're just talking our stuff. So appreciate you, Morgan. What's your moral of the story? You got unmute.
Definitely want to thank you guys for having me. Of course, you know, I'm always going to say yes when you ask. Yes. Because I do love being here, and I learn a lot. And that's one of the things of part of my moral of the story is that, you know, I was educated tonight. Mm-hmm. So I'm doing my little side research because I want to know more about what's going on within the Palestinian community, you know, mm-hmm. and things like that. But I also want to make sure that, you know, we continue to educate ourselves, educate our children. We're still being attacked, whether it's having our voting rights being infringed upon, having certain education, you know, things being taken out of the schools, you know, and then being pacified with a holiday, a federal holiday. Yeah. Doesn't sit well with me. So I just hope that we all continue to, you know, fight this fight and, you know, learn more about, you know, other communities that are going through the same thing. And, you know, I don't know when things are going to turn around, but I just don't want us to take this federal holiday and think that this is
win. It's not a win. We need more. We need more.
Absolutely. Thank you, Morgan. My brother, look, Senator Dwight Bullard is, I don't know, this is my brother for real. Like on a personal note, professional note, I bug him, for guidance and things. So words can't express how much you mean to me and how much I appreciate you. But what's your moral of the story, sir?
Well, we go back to the highest of 7 hills, man. So that is a thing. So
yes, sir.
I think I might have shared this quote on a previous soapbox, but if I have, it's necessary after tonight's conversation, and that is power concedes nothing without demand. Frederick Douglass, right? And what I mean by that is, to the points we make around Juneteenth, to the points we make around making sure that all of us get free globally, we got to step it up. We don't have space and we don't have room for people who don't want to learn their history, who don't want to learn about the history of mankind and the black and brown application to that history, and how it would not exist without our contributions. And so, when I name check folks like Jesus, I'm not saying that to be joking. I'm saying that we're sitting here as Black people, as Rasha pointed out. We got, Black Muslims being the dominant group of Muslims in this country. We got Black Christians that are always talking about the teachings of Jesus Christ, yet and still we have a global, we have this global climate where Black and brown people are getting hit over the head, and you're not even making the connection between the teachings of Muhammad and the contributions of Jesus Christ, and understanding that guess what, they were both Black people living in this world trying to make a damn difference. So the moral of the story is be more moral, right? But be more moral in the realest sense of the word, and stop playing games with these little books that you read, or these little posts that you try to make because you want to quote 2 Corinthians, or you want to quote this passage from the Quran. These folks lived it. And if you want to really be about the business of global liberation, you're going to have to live it too. So come on aboard.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Thank you for coming on. And where could everybody find you real quick? Where can they find you on social media?
Social media at Dwight Bullard on Twitter. I'm rarely ever there though, but you're welcome to follow.
Okay.
At Dwight Bullard _ on Instagram, where I'm there more often. And then the organization I rock with is Florida Rising, at FL Rising on all social media. Even if you don't necessarily agree with all the things we're doing, just know that I'm there. So come on through, connect with me, and let's make this thing a reality.
Absolutely. And of course, a round of applause for Rasha for coming on to the Soapbox Podcast. Hopefully it wasn't too bad. I know it could be a little nerve-wracking. You don't know what TJ gonna say. It's live, but hopefully it wasn't too bad. And you are welcome back anytime. And I appreciate you being so authentic and open with the conversation and speaking your truth. So, Rasha, what's your moral of the story?
No, thank you. It's an honor to be in community with all of you, for real. And to create a space is unconventional, but it's also, it's not popular, right? I mean, it's a little bit more popular today, but it's not popular. So thank you for being a voice of reason and an avenue for education of truth. I'm going to throw an Arab proverb that comes to mind. It says, "El-najah ada mit abu wal-fashil yatim," which means the person who succeeds has 1,000,000 fathers claiming them, and the person who struggles is an orphan. And when I think about that, I think about, the Black Lives Matter movement, when it was just a movement when people were saying defund the police or taking a knee. They were demoralized, disparaged, kicked out of the NFL, right? But then when it becomes a popular thing, a more digestible thing, you have all these people, trying to claim it, co-opt it, use it to their personal agenda. So always take it back to the roots and be people-centered, and understand while it's not necessarily popular doesn't mean that it was a truth. When we think about the civil rights movement, yes, we see masses of people and that's who's going to liberate us, but they were also killed, murdered, vilified, followed by the FBI. We're talking about Nelson Mandela, where he was banned from coming into this country. The same people that banned him were fighting to go to his funeral for a photo op, right? So just really understanding what resistance and resilience looks like, and not to police what that freedom fight looks like. And so when when I think about Juneteenth becoming a federal holiday, it kind of reminds me of like when people tweet out "Free Palestine." We need more than that, right? We need people to be in the struggle, to be in relationship with one another, and understand our co-strugglers' fight and how to be an ally.
Absolutely. And where can they find you on social media? And let me just say this for Soapbox Nation: do not slide in Rosh's DMs in any name of the Soapbox. I'm letting y'all know that right now, and y'all know who I'm talking about. For any of y'all who's watching on Soapbox Nation, we have a very rambunctious Soapbox Nation. They're nice. We get educated, but I just want to put that out there. But where can they find you on social media if they want to be an ally to your causes and stuff like that?
Yeah, it might, balance out some of the hate DMs I've been getting.
Oh, you gonna get? Oh, don't say that, because you'll get a couple of hate strangers.
No, I'm just saying.
Hey, what's up, Queen? You'll get a lot of that. So, where can they find you, Rasha?
At Rasha MK, so that's RASHAMK, Twitter, Instagram. And then, follow the Florida Palestine Network. It's a movement of different co-strugglers that are fighting for the liberation here in the state. Absolutely. Also, Florida Pal Network on all accounts.
Absolutely. Listen, my moral of the story is simply this. This is why the Soapbox started from a notebook pad. And this is why we have created this platform, so that we can have substantive conversations. We don't need to. And I think a long time, when I think it was one of these trainings, someone taught me that you don't need to be an expert to be an advocate. And I think that's very important for everybody to understand, like who are watching or listening to this podcast. You may not know everything. I don't know everything, right? I like to claim that I do. I'm rarely wrong on this podcast, rarely wrong. But you don't need to be an expert. And sometimes the best thing for you to do is listen and learn, and use and support independent media sources so that you can get information, so that you can make your own determination of what's going on with these issues, rather than being spoon-fed what the national media is telling you. So that's why we created the Soapbox. That's why we have this space, and we appreciate you, Soapbox Nation, for always rocking with us every week. And for those who are abroad that are listening to this conversation, and our listeners in Portugal, UK, Ireland, all the countries overseas that are listening to us and rock with us heavy. So we definitely appreciate everybody being on the Soapbox Podcast. And I'm going to do this sign off. So let's do it. So I'm going to do for Jesse, for Giovanni, for Alan, for Morgan, for Senator Dwight Buller, for Rasha, and for Palestine. Hey, this is the Soapbox Podcast. We appreciate you, and we are out. Peace.
Anything, tell me what you talking about. Anything, tell me what you talking about. Anything.